This is a companion piece to a completely accurate summary of Halo Infinite and will be full of spoilers for the campaign. Originally, I recorded my thoughts about Halo while the credits were rolling, but I checked over the footage and it's just unusable. In my infinite wisdom, I decided to play through the entire campaign in one day, which took me 11 hours. I finished at 1:30 in the morning, so the real thoughts is about 20 minutes of yawning. I'm doing something different with this one in that I've written all of my thoughts down this time so I don't forget anything. I'll forget something anyways, I'm sure. I want to start off by talking about the negatives, only because the negatives are so minor in comparison to how much fun this campaign is that anything I say here should be taken with the understanding that it barely leaves a dent on the amount of fun that I had. The big elephant in the room is the lack of co-op. Everyone's already talked this to death, we all know I'm disappointed about it, but nothing to be done at this point, so let's move on. Equipment selection is kind of a pain. The mouse and keyboard binding for equipment is 1, 2, 3, 4, which is kinda awkward to use. The best solution I can think of is to put them all into an equipment wheel that you can bind to a single key to swap between equipment easily. It'd also make adding new equipment easier in the long run because it could just be added to the wheel instead of continuing down the row of number keys. It'd get pretty awkward at 6 or 7 equipments trying to reach across the keyboard to press the keys. I also kinda wish the repulsor was in the campaign. I think it'd be fun to use against vehicles, sword elites, and the raging brutes that rush at you, though I guess that might make it a little too easy to avoid them. Ironically, I think Zeta Halo feels like the smallest Halo ring in the series since you only get to see a small fraction of it. Halo CE 2 and 3 have you traveling across different biomes that really help give this sense that you're making your way across large sections of the ring, but since Zeta Halo only has the one forest biome, it makes it feel like we're really not going anywhere. And we're not. The campaign is pretty much entirely on 2 or 3 chunks of land. The amount of stuff crammed into the map is a ton of fun, don't get me wrong, it's just a shame that we don't get any visual variety in the open world. Is it wrong of me to expect more from the open world? When you think open world Halo, you immediately picture being able to explore the whole ring, and I know 343 squashed those hopes early on by saying it wouldn't be, but having at least multiple giant areas and different biomes to explore would have helped with the scale. Though, with the insane development that this game went through, I understand why there's not more to this game. And we'll likely see it down the road. Maybe in 4 to 5 years we'll have a couple dozen biomes with their own open world sections and this will just be a bad memory. Here's hoping. This is just being pedantic at this point, but the Phantom design really sucks. They decided to go with the Halo Wars 2 Phantom design since that was the already established banished vehicle design, but it really doesn't look good fully realized. It's very blocky and the silhouette is pretty anemic compared to the classic Phantom. It's also a shame we never see any Spirit dropships, which were the U-shaped ones from Combat Evolved. They were in Reach in Halo 5 as well, but again, this is a nitpick that doesn't actually detract from the game in any way. While the individual cutscenes in the game have some pretty good writing, the overall plot is very prequel-y. They had to do some heavy lifting to transition this game into its own thing from Halo 5, so a lot of the campaign is dedicated to filling in new players to old plot lines in a way that makes sense to a narrative, without just being an exposition dump. And it does a really good job. Tons of scenes that are presented as character building are also a good source of information for new fans to learn about the past, though the amount of cutscenes that are just holograms is a little boring. I also don't think that this game benefits from a no-cuts style. There's even some scenes where it actively detracts from the experience in my opinion, with some weird camera angles and overly long transition shots that just fade into black and then back to a new scene. It's kinda cheating at that point since it's not very smooth. My favorite parts of Halo are when it feels like a cheesy action movie. The original Halos are full of campy dialogue and over-the-top action, and Infinite has the campy dialogue, but it's sorely lacking in the over-the-topness. There's glimpses of it, like Chief jumping off the spire into the back of the Pelican, or when the Blade Master kidnaps the pilot and Chief jumps straight onto the Pelican and starts punching the glass to try to get to him. Though, on the flip side, they really lean into letting the gameplay be the fun part. Cutscenes are for cutscene things, gameplay is for action. I really appreciate that, especially the fact that every major enemy is a boss fight. Most of the boss fights are just alright at best, but it's better than the boss fights we've seen previously in the series, and it's better than just beating the bad guy in a cutscene without fighting them at all. Also, the Endless and Reformation or whatever is just really lame. It feels like 343 wants to introduce a new world-ending thing in every Halo. Halo 4 was the Didact, Halo 5 was Cortana, and now we've got these guys. I get that they don't just want to do the Flood again and again, and I think a lot of people really didn't want to see the Flood in Infinite, but maybe just focusing entirely on the Banished as the main threat would have been better. We don't really get a sense of their tactical genius, especially because all of the cutscenes between Escharum and his crew are them complaining about the Master Chief and how he's thwarting their plans. And killing Atriox off-screen and then doing a reveal after the credits that he's alive is very weird. He's a fan favorite character from Halo Wars 2, and I get that they needed some excuse not to have him around so they could do their own thing with Escharum, but like, what? Faking him getting blown up was the best they could do? The story also suffers from the fact that it kinda seems like all the interesting stuff happened 6 months ago while we were floating in space. When you wake up and take back the ring, it's all just cleanup. Fighting through the Infinity and then attempting to stop Cortana only to have the ring blow up on you would have been a way more fun prologue. And then you could have got to the 6 months later stuff. But maybe they couldn't do that because of development time. I would like to see the next campaign be more action-focused now that they've officially tied up the Cortana stuff and introduced their new enemy. We've got plenty of somber moments in this with Weapon and Brohammer, and it seems like they're finally past all of that at the end. It's time to go full cheesy action movie. And just a reminder, none of that stuff negatively affects the campaign enough for it not to be a blast. So now let's move on to the good stuff. Every Halo is super different from each other and spread across so many years that it's always really hard to recommend the series to someone because where do they start? I really do think Infinite is a good starting point. You'll spend some of the campaign pretty confused about what's going on, but that's intentional because the characters are written in a way that they don't have all the pieces either, so them learning new information makes sense from a narrative perspective and also fills you in as the player as to what happened. It also has easily the best gameplay in the entire series, hands down. The grapple hook is so much fun and has so much more utility to it than just is a grappling hook. You can upgrade it to stun enemies, you can grab weapons and fusion coils from far away, you can grapple into enemies and punch them, you can use it to steal banshees. It's so much fun. Comparatively, the other equipment really falls flat in the utility department because they're pretty much only useful for one specific thing, but you also really don't need to ever use them outside of specific scenarios. Saving Marines and having them follow you around is great, and it's super fun to load them all up into a Razorback after handing them all power weapons and just watch them go to town on every banished patrol you come across. The banished outposts are pretty fun to take out. It's your standard base liberation thing that we've seen in every open world ever, so you know what to expect going in. It's nothing new, but there's a reason it's used so much. It's a way to let the player loose and have them experiment with the tools you gave them. Collectibles or whatever, it's just some upgrade points, some really basic skins for multiplayer, and some audio logs. I kinda hate the trend of collectible lore documents in games, but I understand why they're there. It's just for a different kind of player than me. Audio logs are at least better than text documents because you can listen to the audio while you're still playing the game and don't have to stop whatever you're doing to take a moment to read something. The weapon sandbox is great. The few underperforming weapons from multiplayer are really good in the campaign, except the Commando. It still doesn't feel all that great to use, and it's in such a weird place in the sandbox because every weapon is so different from each other that the Commando just feels lame. It's basically just the AR mixed with the range of the BR. It doesn't fit into its own unique niche like the other weapons. The new enemy types are pretty cool. The skimmers fit a role similar to the buggers with more range to them, more or less. The shielded brute enemies and brute chieftains are neat, but they get a little bullet spongy because they just kind of walk around and fire at you without doing anything interesting. In contrast, the hunters actually move around a bunch and force you to keep on your toes, so they're more interesting mechanically. The skirmishers are back, but I don't really know if they have a unique role in the sandbox. They're basically a midpoint between a jackal and an elite, but since they can be taken out in a single headshot, they're a pushover. I hate sniper jackals. I can't believe they brought them back. It's just not fun dealing with long-range enemies. Especially because they're often purposefully placed in areas that are hard to get to even with the grappling hook, so you'll die before you can get to them. Fuck sniper jackals. Sentinels are back, which are fun, though weirdly some of them use the shock rifle, which is a banished weapon, and none of them use the cinder shot, which is a forerunner weapon. In fact, I think I only ever saw like 2 enemies use the cinder shot at all. It pretty much only spawns on weapon racks. Makes it seem like it was a late addition to the game, or maybe it was a late change for balancing purposes. Also, the combat chatter in this game is amazing. It's so much fun to hear the enemies screaming at you, screaming at each other, screaming for their lives. There's some absolutely hilarious dialogue. I had one moment where a Marine said, "What kind of a reject heavy metal band name is the Banished anyways?" It's great, it feels right at home with the classic Halos. The aesthetic of this game is beautiful. The Forerunner architecture is the perfect blend between the classic Bungie geometric design and the shiny 343 design. You spend a lot of time running around inside Forerunner structures, and even though they're all basically the same dark blue color, there's still a lot of variety in the layouts. They do kind of lack places to grapple though. When you're put into an arena to fight enemies, it almost feels like a hindrance to use the grapple for anything other than grappling to enemies or picking things up. Swinging around in the small rooms just gets you shot. I also think Infinite is the best depiction of Chief we've ever had. They really nail the weight of Chief and his larger-than-life presence, and he talks way more than any of the previous games, but it never feels like he's talking too much. It feels like everything he says is very succinct, and the only times he breaks that facade, it's impactful. You can tell he's a very powerful character with a commanding presence, but that he's suffering underneath it all, which is a far cry from Halo Combat Evolved's depiction of Chief as a gullible oaf. He still has plenty of cheesy dialogue though, which is great. The music is pretty good, the few classic tracks that are back are great, and the Banished theme is really memorable, though I feel like we don't get enough places in the campaign where the music really takes over and you're just doing something awesome to some great music. There's also a lot more ambient tracks in this game because it's an open world, so there's a big heap of forgettable music thrown in there with the memorable stuff. This is probably just a me thing, but if the game's music isn't memorable, I don't think it's very good. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. I'm sure I missed something somewhere. Special thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel as well, you'll get your own custom avatar that'll go at the end of the videos that you help support that month.